Could you explain this to us?
Yes, this is the diagram that we use during every autopsy. As you can see, we note the name of the decedent. Every case has its own number. In this case, it was 22-1697. And then we take note of, as I mentioned, during the external examination, physical characteristics such as hair, eyes, teeth. And then on this diagram, we would note any scars we see on the body, any tattoos we see on the body, any injuries we see on the body, and any therapeutic interventions. Those would be things that are sometimes done either by emergency medical personnel or at the hospital. Everything would be noted on this diagram.
Now, if you could take us through, I'm going to ask you, we'll go body part by body part, if that's okay. I'm going to ask you to begin with Mr. O'Keefe's face, the front of his face. And if you could enlarge that, Ms. Gilman. Thank you very much. Did you notice any injuries on Mr. O'Keefe's face? And if so, could you, I think there's a pointer available for you, Doctor? If you could point out on the diagram what you observed.
So on the diagram, well, first of all, there was medical intervention on Mr. O'Keefe that included an endotracheal tube that had been placed to help him breathe. But once all the intervention, all the medical devices were removed, I observed on his right upper eyelid a 1 centimeter laceration. So as we're looking at the diagram, this is the right side and this is the left side. So on his right eyelid, there was a small laceration. I also observed abrasions on the anterior and the left aspect of the nose. So the nose would be here on the front and the left aspect. Abrasions are scrapes. Lacerations are tears in the skin. I should probably explain that. Then there was some bleeding and some swelling of the eyelids of both eyes.
Does that complete your analysis?
For the front of the face, correct, yes.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Doctor, I'm showing you a photograph. Do you recognize what's in that photograph?
Yes, this is a photograph of Mr. O'Keefe's face.
Does that photograph depict any of the observations or injuries you made that you just described to the jury?
Yes, it shows the small laceration that I noted during the autopsy on the right eyelid. You can see some of the swelling and some of the bleeding over his eyelids. And that's pretty much all I can see because it's a side view.
Is there an apparatus?
There is what we call an endotracheal tube, as well as a C collar or a C stabilization collar. That's something that would have been placed on him by medical personnel.
All right, move this into evidence and ask for instruction.
Okay. All right. So, folks, during the testimony of Dr. Scordi-Bello, photos will be introduced to you. They're photographs of John O'Keefe that Dr. Scordi-Bello from the autopsy. So you'll have them in the jury room with you. I'll put them in an envelope, or I'll ask that they be put in an envelope. So if you don't want to look at them now, you don't have to. At some point, we'd ask that you make sure you look at it. These photos are not pleasant, and you may find that they're graphic. But what's important for you to know is that your verdict must not in any way be influenced by the fact that these photographs may be unpleasant or graphic. The defendant is entitled to a verdict based solely on the evidence and not based on pity or sympathy for Mr. O'Keefe, which might be occasioned by these photographs. So consider the photographs only as they draw your attention to a clinical, medical status or to the nature of Mr. O'Keefe's injuries or to the nature of the incident itself. So they'll be displayed up on the screen for you as well.
The last exhibit is Exhibit 156.
Thank you.
Ms. Gilman, could you show the jury? And doctor, can you point out the injuries you were describing by using the diagram, or when you were using the diagram?
So the laceration, the small laceration that I previously described would be here on the right upper eyelid of Mr. O'Keefe. You can see some discoloration that's bleeding under his eyelid and what I would describe as swelling. The endotracheal tube and the neck collar are also present here. And the other injury, which I noted, was on the front and left side of his nose, which you cannot see here because this is looking at the right side of his face.
Okay. Take that down, please. You mentioned that there was something about his eyes that was notable.
Yes, there was bleeding or hemorrhage, as we call it, on the eyelids, as well as swelling.
I'm going to ask you more detail about that later, but was that observation important in your ultimate diagnosis or conclusions?
Yes.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm showing you another photograph. Do you recognize that?
Yes, this is another picture showing Mr. O'Keefe's face. Again, the medical intervention is present, and you can see more clearly now the discoloration on the upper eyelids.
Is this vantage point helpful for your ultimate conclusions and diagnosis?
Yes.
Your Honor, move this one down.
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 157.
With the court's permission, I'd like to show this to the jury.
Yes.
P645, please. Doctor, could you point out what was significant regarding Mr. O'Keefe's eye area?
So I noted that there was discoloration, that's bleeding, that's blood, that's under those eyelids. The eyelids appear puffy, that's what we call edema or swelling. And then also there were two abrasions, two scratches on Mr. O'Keefe's nose. You can see one here and then the other one on the more front part of his nose.
Okay, could you take that down, please? If we could move down a bit to the chest and stomach area, did you make any observations about this area, Dr. Scordi-Bello?
The observations that I made on the chest were that there was, as I mentioned before, there were defibrillator pads on the body, and there was an abrasion that's very commonly seen in people who have undergone resuscitation. Internally, that abrasion and the whole resuscitation apparatus was associated with some anterior rib fractures, which are also seen in cases of resuscitation, but I didn't make any other notes in terms of trauma on the chest or abdomen.
Okay. I'd like to move to the arms and the hands. If we could come down just a little bit. Let's begin with Mr. O'Keefe's hand or hands. Did you make any observations regarding Mr. O'Keefe's hand or hands?
Yes. On his upper right arm, I noted that he had a superficial abrasion. So it would have been, if you can
Can we move that down a little bit?
move it
please?
down a little bit. Yeah, thank you. You seem to be doing a very good job. Okay, somehow doesn't want to
Sorry
work.
if that's not working well.
It's projecting here, but not on the actual picture.
Okay. There may be a second pointer.
I can do it here.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So on the right upper medial arm, that would be the inner side of his arm, there was a superficial abrasion. Again, that's a scrape. Then on his right posterior arm and forearm, so not exactly on this aspect of the arm, but on the back side of the arm, which would be in the back of the diagram, there were multiple abrasions, which I described as ranging from 2 to 3 millimeters and up to 7 centimeters. Then, yeah, if you could move the diagram down, please. Again, there is a back to this diagram. I don't know if you could put that on the screen. There we go. So this is now the right side, and this is the left. I noted that there were 2 bruises on the back of his right hand, also a faint scratch on the back of his left hand. And then moving down to the lower extremities or the legs, if you could please show the front, there was a small abrasion, a small scrape on the side of his right knee.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Doctor, I'm handing you a photograph. Do you recognize it from that photograph?
Yes.
What is it?
This is the back of Mr. O'Keefe's right hand, I believe.
And could you explain, you said there were 2 bruises. Could you point those out for us?
Yes. There's one here and one here.
Did you attempt to assess those, determine whether you could conclude or opine on a cause of those?
No, I did not. Well, I take that back. I'm sorry. So this particular one has 2 small little pinpoint defects in the middle, which we sometimes see when emergency personnel tries to get access to a vein for fluids, for intravenous fluids. So, but I did not put that in my report. I just described it as a contusion.
Is it common to see that type of coloration where medical personnel put intravenous or other types of support into somebody's hand?
Yes, it's very common for the skin to bruise when someone tries to get access to a blood vessel.
The other coloration that is unrelated to those 2 small points, would you have a description of what those are?
No.
I'd also like to show you exhibit number 1. Exhibit number 1, please. Thank you. You used the word superficial. What does that mean?
Superficial means that the abrasion is on the superficial layers of the skin, usually the epidermis and sometimes the dermis, but there's no penetration of the skin.
When you're assessing to determine whether there's any penetration, do you measure the length of the wound or the abrasion?
Penetration would be measuring the depth if there was actual penetration, I would have to measure how deep into the skin. For example, when we assess stab wounds, we have to measure the depth of the wound. In this particular case, you can see that these are scrapes or scratches, and there's no exposed underlying fat or muscle. And therefore, to answer your question, I measured their length and gave a range, but I did not measure their depth.
As a routine practice during an autopsy, doctor, if there was penetration or depth, would you, as a routine, measure that?
I would make a note of it.
Are there any such notes in any of your autopsy findings or reports about depth?
No, I did not make a note on the depth of these wounds.
Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to how those superficial abrasions occurred?
I do not.
And I asked you about the hand, which we just saw, and I should ask you the same question. Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty how that coloration, aside from the medical intervention, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty how the other discoloration happened on Mr. O'Keefe's hand?
I can state to a reasonable degree of medical certainty that that's a bruise, a contusion, but I cannot tell you how it occurred.
And to summarize finally what we've been through so far, regarding the scrape on Mr. O'Keefe's right eye, can you provide an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty how that scrape occurred?
No, I cannot.
You mentioned for us that when you looked at Mr. O'Keefe's legs, you observed bruising on his, or a small scratch on his right knee.
Correct.
I don't want to summarize it. Can you describe that
Can we turn
more
the lights on,
specifically?
please?
Thank you.
Yes, I described it as a 0.5 centimeter abrasion on the right lateral knee.
Did you see any marks or abrasions on his left knee?
No, I did not.
Was the mark, scratch on Mr. O'Keefe's right knee on the inside or the outside of the knee?
It was on the lateral aspect, which would be the outside.
Thank you. May I approach? You used the word lateral and you talked about abrasion or a scrape. Could you look at this photograph and could we enlarge it, Ms. Gilman, and could you point out to the jury and explain what it is that you saw?
Yes, you can see the abrasion here with a little bit of adjacent discoloration, but this is what I was describing.
If you could zoom back out, please. And you didn't see any similar type bruising or abrasions on the left knee?
No.
During your autopsy, did you notice any injuries internally to Mr. O'Keefe's rib area?
Yes, I did note that there were rib fractures on the anterior, that would be the front, of his 4th and 5th ribs.
And so would that be his left or right side?
It would be both the right and the left, and it would be the part of the rib that is closer to the sternum.
Is there a number of ribs that had fractures, or are they connected as one?
The 4th and the 5th, both on the right and the left, close to the sternum.
Have you, in your experience, seen ribs fractured during first aid or medical intervention?
Very often, yes.
Given your experience and your study of Mr. O'Keefe's body, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty how those rib fractures were obtained?
I believe those rib fractures were due to resuscitation.
And you have that opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Yes.
I'd like to show you a different diagram, one of the head area. If we could enlarge the bottom right. Thank you. Using that diagram, could you assist us, doctor, and explain to us any observations you made about the back of John O'Keefe's head?
Yes. The main observation was a laceration that is a skin tear on the back of Mr. O'Keefe's head to the right of midline. So this was the midline. The laceration was somewhere here, is what we call the right occipital area. And associated with that, there was an abrasion over it that would have been here. So this was what we call a compound injury, an abraded laceration.
We'll turn in a few moments to your autopsy observations about the inside of Mr. O'Keefe's skull. But first I want to just show you a photograph relative to what you described to us. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
When you examine the laceration, do you measure it?
Yes,
And did you measure it in this case?
I did measure it.
How long was the laceration?
I measured it as 2.5 centimeters, which is close to an inch.
Do you examine a person's body before you begin to intrude? Do you examine the outside of a person's body first, or is there a certain procedure or order?
Yes, the external examination is done first, and the internal examination is done second.
I want to show you that photograph that you just recognized, and I would like you to explain what you see to the jury. Ms. Gilman, with your assistance, thank you.
This is the laceration that I noted, and this is the scrape that's associated with it.
Take that down, please. After you make observations, what are your next steps in an autopsy?
The internal examination, after the external is performed and pictures are taken, then we proceed with the internal examination of both the, as I mentioned before, the torso, the body, as well as the head.
I'd like you to take us through the internal examination. Did you have a chance to look internally behind the laceration you saw on the back of Mr. O'Keefe's head?
Yes.
And when you did that, could you describe for us what you saw?
Yes. The way we examine the head is we make an incision with a scalpel behind the ear from one side to the other. That allows us to reflect or pull back the scalp, and that will expose the skull underneath. We do this carefully so that we don't disfigure clearly the face. And when we reflected and when we pulled back the scalp, I noted that there was blood, what we call hemorrhage, under the laceration or associated with the laceration on the back of the right head. And then furthermore, there were skull fractures associated with that laceration, abrasion on the right side of the head.
Were the skull fractures in the same or different area?
The skull fractures were in multiple areas of the skull, what we call the base of the skull. Imagine the base of the skull is sort of a bowl, and the brain sits on top or in the bowl. When the brain is removed, you can have a very good view of the base of the skull. So when the brain was removed and we were able to look at the base of the skull, I noted that there were multiple fractures that appeared to be originating from the area of the laceration, or what would correspond to the area of the laceration.
When you made your examination of the fractures in the skull, did that lead you to your opinion, or was there more you needed to look at before you came to an opinion about the cause of death?
Well, that was part of the findings that led to my opinion. But yes, I removed the brain, and as is our protocol, I saved the brain in a special solution called formalin that allows the brain to become a little harder, so that our neuropathologist in Boston could go ahead and examine it. Because when I did look at the brain, I noted that there were injuries. There was bleeding on top of the brain, and therefore I saved it. The brain ultimately went to our Boston office, and our neuropathologist, Dr. Stonebridge, examined it and issued a report.
Did you engage in any type of analysis on your own about any injury to Mr. O'Keefe's brain?
I noted the kind of injuries I could see superficially on the brain, and I have looked at the brain after it was fixed and pictures of it, but I did not issue a report on it. The whole point was for our neuropathologist to examine it closely and issue a more detailed report.